I'm sorry to say that the stories I have for you today can be summed up in one phrase. Them pets are about to get it. But the good news is these stories were creepy enough to even make me turn and look over my shoulder during recording. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you should follow me on X at Dark Prevails. Today's episode features an assortment of terrifying and unexplained stories. From an alleged werewolf in Utah eating people's pets, to an aswang in the Philippines wreaking havoc in one small neighborhood. Enjoy these stories, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. I'm looking for more hiking stories soon. Be sure to follow and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so we can grow and reach even more scary fans. Pre-order my new book, a gorgeous hardcover collection of creepy campfire stories called, Creepy Campfire Stories. You can find it via the link in the description or by going to Amazon and searching for Creepy Campfire Stories by Darkness Prevails. The book releases July 8th, 2025. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Warning. The following story contains depictions of violence against pets. Something was killing the local pets. From Press Scott. Growing up in Salt Lake City, I never gave much thought to wildlife beyond the occasional deer or raccoon. We all knew about the mountain lions and bears in the mountains, but they were distant concerns, like tornadoes or hurricanes, things that happened to other people in other places. That changed when my wife Carrie and I moved our family to what the realtor called a semi-rural community, about 40 minutes outside the city in 2007. We'd outgrown our starter home with 3 kids under 10 years old, and property was cheaper out there. Plus, the idea of giving our kids some space to run around in appealed to us city transplants. We weren't farmers or ranchers by any stretch, but we did enjoy the quiet and the way you could actually see the stars at night out there. The town, I'll leave unnamed, wasn't so much a town as it was a loose collection of homes, small farms, and the occasional business spread out along winding roads. No official boundaries, just the general understanding that once you passed the old grain silo on Route 16, you were in our town. Our closest neighbor was a quarter-mile down the road, which took some getting used to after living in the city. The trouble started in late 2009, about 2 years after we'd settled in. My cousin and his family lived about a mile down the road from us, actually, part of why we'd chosen that area. One morning, my cousin called me, sounding shaken up. "You haven't seen Bruno running around, have you?" Bruno was their Great Dane, this massive but gentle giant who was practically part of the family. "No, man. He didn't get out, did he?" He was quiet for a moment, made me nervous. "The reason I ask is, I'm hoping what I found wasn't the rest of him." "Good lord, man, rest of him? What happened?" "We found him this morning. Part of him, anyway. Something got him last night." I drove over right away. My cousin was in his backyard, shoveling a grave that seemed way too small for how big Bruno was. Then I saw the tarp nearby, and it made perfect sense. There wasn't much left to even bury. The local sheriff's deputy who came out said it was likely a mountain lion. They had been spotted increasingly in the area over the past few years, as new developments kept pushing into their territory. Made sense, I thought, though I remember thinking it was odd that a mountain lion would take on a dog Bruno's size. Those cats are ambush predators. There are much easier meals out there than a 150-pound dog. Life went on. We kept our labs, Max and Cooper, in the fenced backyard to keep them safe during the day when we weren't home or after dark. The kids were instructed not to wander into the woods behind our property alone. A couple months later, in January, the Sewells lost one of their cats. The Sewells were an older couple who lived up the hill from us, early 60s salt-of-the-earth types who'd been farming these hills their whole lives. Their cat, an orange tabby, was found torn apart in their front yard. Awful business, but not that unusual given the wildlife in the area. What was strange was that less than a week later, they lost a second cat the same way. Almost identical circumstances. Remains found scattered across their front yard in the morning. 2 cats in 1 week seemed like terrible luck. But nobody thought too much about it. I mean, sure, it was dreadful and heart-wrenching. But again, we thought it was mountain lions, maybe bears or something. The interesting thing so far was, at least something I thought at the time, whatever was killing these pets seemed to have no interest in the livestock. The Sewells had goats and chickens. Some neighbors down the way had a small herd of cattle. Nobody lost a single farm animal during these events, just pets. I remember talking to Carrie about it one night after the kids were in bed. Doesn't that part strike you as strange? If it is a mountain lion, why is it only going after people's pets? She wasn't sure. She said, maybe they're easier targets. Maybe they're wandering farther from the houses than the livestock might. That made sense to me, so I let it go. Until one night in early March, when someone pounded on our front door around 10 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. Visitors that late aren't common out here where folks rise with the sun. I checked through the peephole to see Mr. Sewell, looking real sketchy on the porch. This was odd. I had only spoken to the man a handful of times since moving here, mostly just waves from the driveway or brief chats at the community pancake breakfast. Evening, Mr. Sewell, I said, opening up the door. Everything okay? He glanced past me into the house. Your family asleep? Kids are, but wife's reading upstairs. What can I do you for? Mind if we step outside a minute? Got something I need to talk to you about. I wasn't feeling it, seeing how cold it was out there, but I obliged. Mr. Sewell didn't waste time once we were alone on the porch. You folks ever seen or heard anything unusual around here since moving in? Anything that didn't seem right? Can't say that we have. Why? Is everything okay, Mr. Sewell? He took off his cap and ran a hand through thinning gray hair. He looked so tired, had circles and bags under his eyes. What I'm about to tell you stays between us, you understand. I'm only telling the men with families in the hollow. I nodded, starting to get nervous myself. Last night, I was taking some scraps out to the goats. Late, maybe 11:30. Martha was already in bed. I was spreading the scraps in their trough when I heard breathing. Deep and heavy breathing, like something big trying to be quiet. At first, I thought one of the goats was getting sick, but they were all huddled on the far side of the pen. There was something in there with them, in the corner of the pen, big as a bear, maybe bigger, all hunched over. I could just make out the outline, all fur and bulk. But here's the thing that doesn't make sense. The goats didn't seem to care. They weren't scared at all, just standing there like it was normal to have this thing in there with them. That sent a chill up my spine, and it wasn't from the cold. I ran right back to the house for my rifle, but by the time I got back, the thing was gone. Well, this morning we found Lily, our last cat, or what was left of her, by the goat pen. Jeez, I'm sorry, I said. That's not the worst of it. His voice dropped lower. The night before, Martha and I locked everything up tight. We were keeping the cat in since we lost the first 2, but I forgot to lock one of those windows, the one in the laundry room. This morning it was open a few inches. Those are crank windows, you know the type. If they're locked, the crank won't turn from the outside, but something, had cranked it open from out there, and You think whatever killed your cats got in your house? The thought made my stomach turn. I think it tried to. Maybe it lured Lily out, or maybe she got out on her own through the window. Either way, something opened that window, and it wasn't the wind. He put his cap back on. Just needed to warn you. Keep you and your family safe. I've talked to the neighbors too. We're thinking of organizing some kind of hunt, but until then, just lock up tight, especially after dark. After that night, I was definitely more vigilant. The dogs stayed inside unless one of us was directly supervising them. The kids were not allowed to play outside alone, especially near dusk. I bought new locks for all the windows and checked them twice before bed each night. For a couple of weeks, nothing happened. No more pets went missing, no sightings of unusual wildlife. I was hoping that Mr. Sewell was seeing things. Maybe it was stress, maybe poor lighting playing tricks on him. Then came a certain evening. The weather had warmed up enough for the kids to play outside after dinner. Carrie was cleaning up the kitchen, and I was in my home office, finishing up some work emails. It was when the sun had set, but there was still enough light in the sky. Just a bit. Maybe 6:30 or 7 p.m. Suddenly, I heard Carrie scream from the front yard. Not a startled yelp, but a full-throated, primal scream of terror. I knocked over my chair getting to the door. By the time I made it outside, Carrie had our youngest girl clutched to her chest and was hurrying the other two toward the door. "Now, get inside," she was saying. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard her in such a panic. "What is it? What happened?" I asked, scanning the yard for threats. My entire run out here, I was hoping that my kids were alive and well, and luckily they were. She pointed beyond our lawn, to where our property met the tree line. I squinted, struggling to see it, and then I did. I thought it was a very large coyote. We get coyotes from time to time, but they usually keep their distance from houses. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized this was much bigger than any coyote I'd ever seen. And it was standing up. It was on 2 legs. The thing was about 50 yards away from us, just at the edge of where our yard light reached. It had the general shape of a wolf or a very, very large dog, with a canine head and thick fur covering its body. But it stood upright on 2 strangely bent legs, like someone had taken the back legs of a dog and forced them to support a more human-like posture. Its front limbs hung down past where its knees would be, ending in what looked like elongated paws. And it was just watching us, head slightly tilted, completely still except for what might have been the rise and fall of its chest as it breathed. It took me a moment to get my voice back. Then I said, "Inside, now." I backed toward the door, unwilling to turn my back on the thing. Once we were all inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then I ran like a madman throughout the house, making sure every window and door was locked and secured. What Mr. Sewell had told me kept echoing in my head, about something opening his window, so I had to be sure that nothing could get inside. "What was that?" my wife kept asking me. "What the heck was that?" "I don't know," was all I could say. "I don't know." I called the sheriff's office. They sent a deputy out about an hour later, but by then, whatever it was had long gone. The deputy took some statements but didn't seem particularly concerned. And he said, just a coyote, that they can look strange in poor light conditions. Maybe it had mange, which would explain the unusual appearance. I wanted to say something back, but I caught myself, realizing if I'd argued it was something beyond normal, that I would sound crazy. And the idea of sounding crazy to a cop didn't seem like a good idea. But I knew from the look in Mr. Sewell's eyes that night on my porch that he had seen it too. The next day, I drove around to the neighbors who had kids, repeating Mr. Sewell's warning, but with more urgency. No kids alone outside, and be extra cautious near dawn or dusk. No pets left outside overnight. Lock everything up. The community pulled together. Some of the men did organize hunting parties, going out in groups of 4 or 5 with rifles and spotlights. Nothing was ever found, but one of the neighbor's oldest boys claimed he did see eyes reflecting their flashlights one night. Eyes that were a bit too high off the ground for a normal animal. As suddenly as it had started, the killings stopped. Spring turned to summer. No more pets went missing. No more sightings of strange creatures at the edges of our yards. Life slowly returned to normal, though I noticed most families were still more cautious than before. Kids played in groups and pets came in before dark. It's been 13 years now since those events. My oldest is in college, the other 2 in high school. We live in the same house too, though many of our neighbors have moved on. Mr. Sewell passed away in 2015, and Mrs. Sewell moved to be closer to their daughter in Oregon. Sometimes I think maybe we all overreacted to some natural predator passing through. Maybe it really was just a mountain lion or a bear with unusual behavior patterns. Maybe what Carrie and I saw that evening was some coyote with a disease that affected its posture or appearance. But then I remember the look in its eyes as it watched my kids play. It wasn't the vacant stare of a wild animal. It was something calculating, something patient. I still check all the windows before bed, every single night. And when I hear coyotes howling in the distance, I find myself listening for anything that might sound just a little bit different, a little bit wrong. Because whatever it was that passed through our town in 2009, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't hunting for food. It was hunting for something else, and I'm scared that one day it might come back. Warning: the following story contains depictions of violence against animals. Something or someone's on the roof. From Phil G. It happened back in 2012 or 2013, when I was living in the Philippines, somewhere in Mindanao. Our house was a modest 1-story dwelling with a high roof, about 14 to 15 feet from the ground to the top. The 3 houses surrounding ours were spaced roughly 16 to 18 feet apart, and had roofs of similar height. We lived near a river, a short walk away, and just beyond that lay dense whispering woods rumored to be haunted by an aswang, this shapeshifter from Filipino folklore. The aswang is often described as a terrifying creature that can take on many forms, such as a human by day and a monstrous beast by night. It is said to prey on the vulnerable, and sometimes accompanied by eerie otherworldly animals. One day I was lounging on the couch watching Adventure Time with my 2 cousins. Outside, the usual routine went on. Our cousin's mother was on the porch carefully arranging a mat, and my grandma was busy in the kitchen, boiling water for her coffee. Out of nowhere, Grandma noticed something unusual: a black cat creeping behind our house. This wasn't an ordinary feline either. It had a noticeable bald patch and strange raw wounds on its body, as if it had already encountered something bad. Without warning, and driven by an instinct tied to local lore, my grandma threw boiling water at the cat. The creature let out a scream, a bizarre, inhuman shriek that sent chills down my spine, a sound no cat could make. It had bolted away immediately, running until it disappeared. It was bedtime by around 8 or 9 p.m., and the lights would be out. I was already drifting off when an eerie commotion shattered the silence. I was jolted awake by this relentless noise coming from above me. I could hear my grandma furiously jabbing at the roof with a long stick, shouting, "In Jesus' name!" She sounded desperate and panicked. Each strike vibrated the walls of the house, but I heard something else through them. Footsteps. There was someone or something walking around on the roof, and whatever it was began to release these furious snorts and shrieks. It was like every jab of my grandma's stick only fueled its anger. Eventually, the thing leapt from our house to one of the neighboring roofs. Apparently, the weight of the thing managed to dent our aluminum roof and crack part of the foundation. I continued to hear its angry snorts, but they were getting more faint, and eventually they were gone. But that wasn't the end of it. One of our neighbors seemed very determined and angry, because he came outside and began to shout about killing the darned thing. He hurled ash and salt in a desperate attempt to ward off evil presences. Somewhere in the distance at the same time, I heard the most horrifying and deafening cry, like the mix between a woman's wail, a cat's shriek, and a pig's grunt. The following morning, we actually talked to that neighbor. He said, amidst all the chaos, he had seen the silhouette of a large cat, a cat far larger than any typical feline, and, with a flash of lightning, as there was a thunderstorm overhead that night, he swore he saw something unthinkable. The shape of that cat transformed. In a split second, it became a crooked, hunched-over woman with impossibly long arms and legs, her disheveled hair floating around her. Looking at the dented and battered roof afterward, this cemented that the event was real to me. The legends were true, so true that they walked right above me on my roof in the middle of the night. I'm glad it didn't come any closer. The Glass Cat, from Meowie87. This story's a bit long, but I do hope you enjoy it. This happened a long time ago, back when I was a young teenager. If memory serves me right, this took place on a warm and sunny day in July somewhere in Virginia. I was 14 years old and had some birthday money that I was excited to blow. My parents took me to my favorite place to go anytime I had money to spend, the local thrift store. I always loved to search for unique and vintage items, and our local store always had the best stuff. I was running through the store tossing cute clothes, old books, and shoes in the cart, when it caught my eye. A white, painted, antique glass cat. It had a little red collar and blue eyes. I squeed and instantly fell in love. I gently placed it in my cart, and we checked out with my haul. Once we got back to the house, I picked a special place in my bedroom to put my new glass cat, right on my dresser, near my jewelry box. "Welcome home," I said, and smiled. Just then, I felt a gentle brush on my leg. But that was my cat Mitzi. She was rubbing back and forth on my leg and purring. I let her know that I had not forgotten about her. I reached down to pet her, and she meowed back up at me and jumped onto my dresser. I remember she looked at that glass cat and hissed. "Whoa there, Mitzi," I said, and I quickly grabbed her off the dresser. In her panic, she scratched my arm and ran off. In pain, I grabbed my arm. It was lightly bleeding, so I went to the bathroom to grab a bandage. My mother had heard the commotion, so she came over to the bathroom door to check on me, to see if I was okay. "I heard you yell from the other room. Everything all right?" "Yeah, I'm okay," I replied. "That new glass cat I bought really spooked Mitzi, though. Silly cat. Maybe she thought it was a real cat," I said, chuckling. My mother went back off to finish cooking dinner, and I went back to my room. As I went back in, I noticed the glass cat was now lying face down. I was confused, but then I realized that Mitzi must have jumped up and knocked it over while I was in the bathroom. I sighed and put it back upright. Then I went and shut my bedroom door to keep Mitzi out, so she wouldn't break anything. I was thinking, that crazy cat. And right after thinking that, I heard a soft meow from somewhere behind me. I turned around expecting to see Mitzi, but nothing was there. I froze for a second, looking around but not seeing anything. "What the heck?" I said out loud. I moved over to my bed and looked underneath, but still no sign of Mitzi. Right after I stood up, I began to hear scratching coming from my door. I walked over and opened it, and there on the other side was Mitzi. She was rubbing on the now open door and meowing loudly. Before I could react, I heard my mother yelling from the other room. "Did you feed the cat?" she called. "I will now," I answered back as I ran off to prepare Mitzi's food. She happily strode behind me, purring and meowing all the way to her food bowl. After I had dinner, I was getting ready for bed. I was standing in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I remembered that meow I heard earlier. My mom walked past the door, so I decided to tell her about it. "That's strange," she replied. "Maybe you were just hearing Mitzi and thought it was coming from inside your room," she suggested. I tried to accept that answer because it was better than me thinking I was hearing things. But even so, I didn't fully believe it. I just simply tried to forget about it and focus on other things. Later that night, I was lying in bed, and I felt what I thought was Mitzi jump on the blanket. She made her way to my feet, and I felt her lie down. I snuggled my face in my pillow, getting ready to fall back to sleep when I heard meowing from the floor. I looked down, and there was Mitzi, sitting there looking up at me. I sat straight up, very confused, because I had just felt her hop on the bed not more than 5 seconds ago. I quickly turned on my lamp and sat all the way up in bed, pulling my feet towards me. I looked over where I thought previously Mitzi had been, but nothing was there. Strangely, when I placed my hands on the spot, it was as cold as ice. I was very disturbed by what just happened. Mitzi finally hopped on the bed for real this time, and I sat there just petting her until she started to doze off. I couldn't fall asleep, however. I was still creeped out by everything, and the adrenaline was making my heart pound. I sat there for a long time, until I began to hear the birds outside. Then I finally started to fall asleep. But I was later woke up by the sounds and smells of my mother preparing breakfast. As I walked down to the kitchen, my mother looked at me with a little bit of concern. "What's up with you?" she said. "You look like death. Did you get any sleep last night?" "Well, thanks, Mom," I said sarcastically. "No, I couldn't sleep." I then explained what happened. She looked at me and even checked my head for a fever. She then told me that perhaps I felt a spring in the bed pop or something. I could tell she was worried, but was just trying to make me feel better. I pretended to agree with her suggestion and sat down to eat breakfast. Blueberry pancakes and bacon. In the midst of that, I forgot all about what happened to me the previous night. A few days later, I noticed something very weird was going on. Mitzi was acting off. She just wasn't her usual self. She was on edge, hissing at things and sometimes even biting or scratching us when we tried to pet her. The whole situation had me worried sick that something was wrong with her. We took her to the vet, but they didn't find any signs of illness. That was a relief, but still, it didn't solve the bizarre behavior thing. The vet suggested that maybe a stray cat was wandering our property at night, and she was smelling him, and that's why she was so on edge. They gave me some cat pheromone spray to use around the house to try to calm her nerves. This helped a little bit, but it didn't stop her behavior entirely. Sometimes she would act spooked. Her hair would stand up, and she would stare seemingly at nothing, hissing or growling, then run off. This behavior went on for weeks. Other strange things started to happen around the house. I would wake up with scratches in weird places that looked like cat scratches. I'd hear scratching on the doors and walls that sounded like claws scraping. All of that was freaky enough, but it's what happened next that made my blood run cold. One night, I was lying in my bed with my bedroom door open. I was relaxing when I started to hear what sounded like scratching again. I looked over at my open bedroom door to see what looked like a white, fluffy cat. I stared at it, thinking I was going crazy. That couldn't be Mitzi. Mitzi's a calico cat and looked nothing like that. I started to feel sick to my stomach, and I stared for a few minutes, and it stared back. Suddenly, I watched it change shape. It stood up on two legs and morphed into something that looked ghoulish, with gray skin, yellow eyes, and bat-like ears. I screamed and pulled the covers over my head. I heard my mother running into my room, and she asked me what was wrong. I told her about the horrible thing I just saw. She looked so worried. She stayed with me for a while, trying to calm me down, telling me it was okay, that I had a bad dream. I knew what I saw, though, and I was really disturbed. I was not about to fall back to sleep that night. A few days went by after that, and I was in the kitchen making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I felt a gentle brushing against my leg. I assumed it was Mitzi, rubbing against my leg again. But when I looked down, there was nothing there. I got that sick feeling in my stomach again. I started looking around for Mitzi to make absolutely sure that she hadn't just been in the room with me. As I turned around, I heard a loud sound that sounded like metal hitting the wall beside where I'd been standing. The butter knife I was using to spread my peanut butter was now lying on the floor. Something had thrown it in my direction, and a little bit of peanut butter was stuck to the wall where it hit. This is when I had enough. Whatever was haunting my house was messing with my cat, terrorizing me, and now it was trying to hurt me. I turned to the internet researching about hauntings, and I read a story about haunted objects. I realized sometimes spirits could attach themselves to certain objects, and then it dawned on me that the only recent item in our home that could potentially be haunted was that glass cat I'd brought home. I quickly ran to my room, picked up the glass cat, and started towards the trash. I opened up the trash can and began to throw the figure in, when suddenly it felt as if my finger had been sliced. I looked down. There was blood dripping from my finger. The glass cat had no cracks, no broken pieces. There was no way for it to have cut me. It was like the glass figure knew I was trying to get rid of it and was trying to fight back. I tossed it in the trash, tied the bag with my finger still bleeding, and in pain, I took the bag to the outside trash can and chucked it inside. The trash was picked up the following day, and that's when all the activity stopped. Mitzi started to act like herself again, and everything went back to normal. I have no idea to this day how or why that glass cat was haunted, or what was actually attached to it. But I've learned that you have to be careful when bringing antiques into your home. You never know what negative energy might be attached to them, or what kind of entities might be waiting to haunt you. The middle of nowhere Washington nobody talks about. From Amanita. I live in the middle of nowhere in Washington state, surrounded by the sounds of nature, crickets and frogs and the occasional noise from goats or chickens. The quiet of the night is comforting, but it can also be eerie when things don't feel quite right. Normally my goats, especially one named Vernon, are loud and excited, and it ramps up around feeding time. Vernon is always making noise and panicking over anything that moves, like a leaf in the wind or a deer in the distance. So when I fed them one evening and later noticed that everything was unusually quiet, it felt off. I thought maybe it was nothing, just some deer in the field across the road. But as I went back inside my house and let my dog in, I felt this nagging sense that something wasn't right. The quiet outside felt too still. There should have been sounds, even the slightest rustling from the animals, but there was nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I remembered what my dad had told me during camping trips. When there's an unnatural silence, it usually means a predator is nearby. So I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, keeping the camera on to record just in case something went wrong. I checked on the chickens first. They were roosting just as I expected. But when I went to check on the goats, I noticed something strange. They were too quiet, not acting like they normally do when they see me. My gut told me something was off. I stood there listening, and the only thing I could hear was silence. Then something caught my eye. I saw the reflective eyes of my goats shining back at me from the dark, which was a relief. They were all accounted for. But under Vernon, there were two smaller, closer-set eyes, ones that didn't belong to any of my goats. They blinked, and for a split second, I couldn't even comprehend what I was seeing. Vernon, of all the goats, wasn't panicking. He wasn't yelling or running, and that made the situation even stranger. The eyes disappeared without a sound, and I felt a chill run through me. That night I felt like something was watching me, and it made me scared. Ever since I've been hearing odd noises, but I've never seen whatever it was again. The quiet, that feeling of being watched, never truly left me. The world outside my door feels a bit more mysterious now. I can't forget what I saw, even though I haven't seen it again. The Crawling Shapeshifter from Platypus Lover 5. It all started with me and my friend F. We both live fairly close to each other in some place in Norway. We always liked to adventure around the area, in the forest and such, searching for the unexplained, the paranormal. One day when he was at my place, we went out into the woods. We were going to build a little hideout between a couple of trees in the snowy wonderland that was not so deep into the forest, but it was still far enough for us to not see a single house around. After a while, growing satisfied with the result, we took a break and looked around, only to see a footprint that looked like nothing we'd ever seen. It was clawed, but too large to be a fox's, and the only thing it resembled was maybe a malformed bear, even though bears don't live in that area. There was a path of these footprints, but the weird thing was that they seemed to shift around, getting smaller and smaller for each step, until the path ended as a bird's feet instead. You might think nothing of that. Maybe it was just a big dog and a bird's footprints crossing together. But that still didn't explain why they got smaller. The really creepy thing, though, happened near my friend's house when I came over to visit. I've only ever seen a blur of this thing. Our first encounter was on a creepy evening on the 11th of September. Our first creepy event was walking into a deep and unpaved part of the woods. It was completely silent, not a sound from the ever so lively crickets or birds that had been singing so much before. It was quiet like that for a while. But out of nowhere, we heard a scream, a human scream. Neither of us dared to stay off the path any longer. We bolted back to the main road. We still felt a little daring, though. Shook, but daring. We went inside for a bit, until it was time to go for a walk with his dog. F and I were both ready for a new spook, so we went along the scariest road we could find. The one with old houses on one side and a vast forest on the other. We walked along for about half an hour or more in one direction, looking through windows and checking out the forest. Not too far, though. What we found eventually was nothing. Nothing out of the ordinary except for a creaky piece of metal that kept making noise. I can't remember if it was a flagpole or a door or something, but it was making this sort of screeching rhythm. As we figured we'd traveled far enough, we turned back. We checked every house and tree one last time. For a long time, the scariest thing that happened was a car driving past, meaning absolutely nothing had happened yet. We were about to lose hope when, "Run," said my friend. I didn't get to react or look behind me before adrenaline grabbed hold of me, and I just started doing as he said. I ran. May I add that my friend had a dog that is barely fazed by anything. He's a very rare Norwegian breed, and is not the kind to bark or jump at just anything. This time, though, he was trembling. We halted after taking a turn after a long, straight stretch of the road. I turned to F, asking what had happened. He described seeing a humanoid figure with a skeletal, pale body. It had claws, no nose, and a round, gaping mouth with tiny, sharp teeth all around its mouth. We were both hesitant to sleep that night, scared the thing might crawl up to the window. I would later see it on another walk with the dog. A white smudge moving along that exact path that we had walked. The thing that ties it all together, though, is the time we drove past that area on our way to the movies. This white deer jumped in front of us, and I mean all white, just like that thing in the woods. That's the reason I mentioned the strange tracks. I think it's a shape-shifting demon that only comes out in the dark. It's the reason I never go out in the forest alone in the evening. I really hope this was the last time I'll ever see it, or any suspiciously white animal in the forest. Sure, albinos exist, but I strongly doubt that this was an albino. I think it all ties into what my friend and I dub the night crawler. The not deer that haunted me. From Stin. First off, let me say this. Be careful who you have kids with. Seriously. Trust me, it matters even though it sounds random here. I thought my ex was a decent guy. Not perfect, but decent. Shows how much I knew. 3 months after Lily was born, I found out he was seeing someone from his office. When I confronted him, he just shrugged like it was nothing. "You're always tired. The baby's always crying. What did you expect?" What did I expect? Well, not that. Anyway, he left. And suddenly I was a 23-year-old single mom with a 9-month-old working as a CNA at the hospital. The day shift was filled, so I took what was available. 11 to 7, overnight. Not ideal with a baby, but my parents agreed to help. They'd watch Lily while I worked, and I'd pick her up in the morning. The only affordable place for me at the time was the tiny house my parents owned way out in the woods. They'd bought it years ago thinking they could fix it up and sell it, but never really got around to it. It wasn't much at all. 1,000 square feet, 2 bedrooms, and drafty windows. But it was free thanks to my parents, and beggars can't be choosers. There was just one problem. To get from my parents' place to mine, you'd have to drive through about 2 miles of dense forest on a narrow, winding road. During the day, no big deal. But at 7:30 in the morning in late November, when the sun's barely up and fog clings to the trees, different story. That morning started like any other. I clocked out at 7, drove the 15 minutes to my parents' place, and found my mom already feeding Lily breakfast. Dad was making coffee. They both looked tired. Lily had been fussy all night, teething probably. Great, that meant she'd be cranky all the way home. Sure enough, she started to wail about 2 minutes after I strapped her into her car seat. Nothing I did would help. Not singing, not the pacifier, nothing. I was exhausted, running on maybe 3 hours of broken sleep from the day before. All I wanted was to get home, put Lily down for a nap, and crash for a few hours myself. I was about halfway through the forest stretch when I saw it. There was a deer standing smack in the middle of the road. Not unusual for these parts. Whitetails are everywhere, and they're not exactly known for their brain power. Normally, they'd bolt as soon as they see headlights. But this one, it didn't move. It was a decent-sized buck, maybe an 8-pointer, facing away from me. I slowed to a stop about 20 feet away, expecting it to dart off into the trees at any moment. But it didn't. It stood there perfectly still except for the slight movement of its sides as it breathed. "Come on," I muttered, too tired for all of that. Lily was still crying in the back. I tapped the horn lightly. Most deer jump at the slightest noise, but this one, nothing. Not even a flinch. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Was it sick? Chronic wasting disease is a thing around here. Or worse, was it rabid? I double-checked that my doors were locked, though I'm not sure why. It's not like a deer's gonna walk up and open the door handle. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, the deer slowly turned its head to look at me. I wish I could say I imagined what I saw next, but I didn't. The deer's eyes were solid white. No pupils, no irises. Just solid milky white orbs that seemed to glow in my headlights. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was its mouth, or what was left of it. The entire lower jaw was missing. Not injured or hanging off, but completely gone. I could see straight into its throat, a dark hole framed by jagged bits of flesh that looked long-healed. My blood ran cold. This thing should not be alive. It shouldn't be standing there as calm as it could be, staring at me with dead, white eyes. I must have made some sound, because Lily's crying actually stopped for a moment. The silence was almost worse than her wailing. The deer, if that's what it even was, continued to stare at me for a few more seconds. Then, as casually as if it were strolling through a meadow, it turned and slowly walked off into the woods. Not running, not startled, but a casual, almost theatrical exit. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, until Lily started to cry again. That snapped me out of it. I hit the gas, probably harder than I should have, and I didn't slow down until I reached my driveway. I said to myself, I'm just tired. I'm just imagining or not seeing things right regarding the missing jaw, or at least how severe it really had been. Maybe the deer had been injured, but not as badly as I thought. And those wide eyes, probably just the way the headlights reflected off of them. Animals' eyes do weird things in bright lights. That's all. I almost convinced myself. Almost. For a week, I took a different route home. It added about 15 minutes to the drive, but I didn't care. Lily seemed to be over whatever had been bothering her, so the drives were quieter at least. Then one morning, it was pouring rain, like Noah's Ark levels of downpour. The longer route had a section that always flooded in heavy rain, so I figured one day back on the forest road would not kill me. Besides, it had been a long week. Whatever I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, was long gone. I was wrong. The forest road has exactly one stop sign, where it intersects with another rarely used dirt road. I always stop, even though I've never once seen another car pass me there. Force of habit, I guess. I had just come to a complete stop there, wipers going full speed against the downpour, when something moved at the edge of my headlights. I squinted, trying to see through the rain-streaked windshield. It was the deer, the same one. I knew it immediately. Before I could react, it walked right up to my driver's side window. This thing that should have been dead, that looked dead, that should have been minimum severely weakened by its injury, moved so confidently and healthily. The thing stopped inches from my window, head now level with mine. Those white eyes stared right at me, unblinking. I could see now that they weren't just white. They were cloudy like cataracts, but somehow still focused. The missing lower jaw was exactly as I had remembered it, a gaping hole where flesh and bone should be. Up close, I could see that the edges of the wound were black and gnarled, but not fresh. Whatever had happened to this animal had happened long ago. But that was impossible. No deer could survive like this. If it couldn't eat, it couldn't drink, it would be dead. And yet here it was, looking healthy otherwise. Coat glossy, antlers impressive, body weight normal. Lily was asleep in the back, thank God. I didn't want her to see this thing. though I don't know why that thought crossed my mind. She was one. She wouldn't understand and wouldn't remember. I gasped when the deer pressed its mutilated face against my window, leaving a smear of what looked like black ichor on the glass. Its breath fogged the window from that gaping throat hole. My fight or flight kicked in hard. I stomped on the gas, blasting through the stop sign and fishtailing slightly on the wet road. In my rearview mirror, I could see the deer still standing in the middle of the intersection, its head turned to follow my car, those white eyes visible, even through the rain and distance. I decided to call in sick that night, told my supervisor I had a stomach bug. I spent the day jumping at every sound, checking and rechecking the locks. When darkness fell, I closed every blind and curtain in the house. Silly, I know, but if this thing, whatever it was, wanted in, I doubted the place's flimsy locks and blinds would stop it. But the next night, I had to go back to work. We were short-staffed, and I needed the money. My parents came to get Lily from my place so that I didn't have to do the forest drive in the dark. Mom noticed something was off with me, but I brushed it off as fatigue. What was I supposed to say? I'm being stalked by an undead deer. My shift dragged on forever, I swear. Every time I had to walk down a dark hallway, too, I found myself looking over my shoulder, hoping I wouldn't see white eyes staring back at me. By 7 a.m., I was a nervous wreck. The drive to my parents' place was uneventful. Maybe whatever strange delusion I'd been experiencing was over. Lily was her usual morning self, fussy but manageable. Mom was able to get some breakfast into her, which was a small miracle. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving everything damp and misty. Perfect horror movie weather, but I pushed that thought away. The forest road was clear all the way home. No sign of the deer, no sign of anything unusual. Just trees and mist. I pulled into my driveway feeling relieved. Maybe it really had been exhaustion playing tricks on me. I got out, went around to the back door and unbuckled Lily from her car seat. She was half asleep, her little head lolling against my shoulder as I balanced her on my hip and grabbed the diaper bag. I had just closed the car door and turned toward the house when I saw it. That same deer was standing between me and my front door, barely 20 feet away. In the full morning light, it looked even more wrong. Its hide had an unnatural sheen, like it was wet or coated in something. Those antlers I thought were impressive now looked a bit too large and too jagged. And those milky dead eyes were fixed directly on me and Lily. I instinctively pulled Lily closer to me, turning slightly so my body was between her and the deer. That's when it started to walk towards us. Not charging and not running, but a steady, slow walk. I had nowhere to run except back to the car. I yanked open the back door and practically dove inside. Lily was now fully awake and starting to cry from the sudden movement. I slammed the door shut and hit the lock button on my key fob for good measure. I then scrambled to the front seat so I could drive away if needed, after putting Lily back in her car seat. But when I looked out the window, the deer was gone. It had vanished. I scanned the entire yard, the edge of the forest, everywhere I could see from inside the car, but there was nothing. Lily was in full meltdown mode now, but I stayed put. For about 20 minutes I sat in that car, engine running, heat blasting, checking and rechecking every direction. No sign of the deer. Finally, with Lily screaming herself hoarse, I made a decision. I grabbed her tight, opened the door, and ran for the house. I made it without a hitch. I called in sick again that night, and the next. Just told my parents I had the flu and couldn't risk getting Lily sick too. I didn't sleep, just sat up watching the windows, jumping at every sound. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I had just seen a regular deer with some kind of injury, and my sleep-deprived brain had filled in the rest. One morning I heard something on my front step. Not a knock, more like something being sat down. I waited and listened. Nothing else. No footsteps walking away. No car engine. After a few minutes of silence, I worked up the courage to look through the window. Nothing there that I could see. I waited another hour before opening that door. Just a crack at first, ready to slam it shut at the first sign of movement. Nothing. I opened it wider and looked down. There, on my front step, was a deer's lower jaw. Not fresh, this thing was ancient, dried out and mostly decomposed. Bits of flesh and gristle still clung to the bone in places, black with rot. I slammed the door and called the police. They came, took a report, and looked at the jaw. The officer suggested it was probably some animal, a scavenger that found some dead meat and just left it there for whatever reason. That day I took whatever little savings I had and moved into a cheap hotel, just long enough to find an apartment we could afford, so I didn't have to drive through those woods ever again. I'd left the keys to the house in the mailbox and drove away that day. About a week after, Dad went back to get the rest of our stuff. He said the place was exactly as I'd left it. To this day, I have no idea what that deer wanted from me, but I am sure beyond the shadow of a doubt that that thing was no deer. At least, not anymore. Do you think you could take a buck in a fist fight? I mean, imagine a zombie deer walks up to your house and challenges you for the love of your wife. Only knuckles versus antlers. Who's winning? Yeah, it's a goofy question, but it's coming from a goofy man. Thanks for listening to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you should follow me on X @DarkPrevails. Send me your scariest stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org so I can narrate them.